In every corner of America, there are stories the headlines forgot, murders that never made prime time, disappearances that were buried beneath louder scandals, victims who vanished not only from this world but from our collective memory. Their names were whispered in small-town diners, their photos faded on bulletin boards, their pleas for justice drowned out by the noise of bigger, flashier crimes. But behind each of these forgotten cases lies a life stolen, a family shattered, and a truth still waiting in the shadows. This is not just a journey into true crime, this is a voice for the silenced, a light for the overlooked, and a reckoning for the cases America chose to ignore. In the quiet hours before dawn on June 7, 1992, in the heart of Springfield, Missouri, a city known for its friendly neighborhoods, church steeples, and the kind of summer nights where the air hums with crickets and the scent of blooming magnolias, an unspeakable mystery was unfolding, one that would haunt the city for decades and remain one of America's most baffling, underrated disappearances, the vanishing of Cheryl Levitt, her 19-year-old daughter Susie Streeter, and Susie's 18-year-old friend Stacy McCall, three women bound together by circumstance, friendship, and fate, who seemed to vanish into thin air without leaving so much as a broken lock or a cry for help, their absence echoing through the walls of a modest single-story home on East Delmar Street. The night before, Stacy and Susie had attended their high school graduation, laughing and dancing at parties, planning to spend the night at another friend's house, but when that plan fell through, they decided to head to Susie's home, where Cheryl, an independent, hard-working cosmetologist known for her caring smile and impeccable home, waited, unaware that she was about to become part of a chilling enigma. Sometime after 2 a.m., the two girls arrived, their cars later found neatly parked in the driveway, their purses and clothes inside, makeup still scattered on the bathroom counter as if abandoned mid-routine. But by the next morning, when friends tried to reach them for a planned trip to the water park, calls went unanswered, the front door was unlocked, and the only signs of disturbance were a broken porch light globe and a strange, unsettling sense that the air inside the house had thickened with absence. Police were called, but crucial time was lost as friends, family, and even strangers entered the home in those first hours, unknowingly contaminating what might have been vital evidence, erasing fingerprints, moving items, washing away traces of the truth, and as investigators pieced together the night, they found no clear signs of struggle, no blood, no overturned furniture, just three lives cut abruptly from the fabric of the world. Suspicion briefly fell on local men with criminal histories, including a known felon named Robert Craig Cox, who had been convicted of murder in another state and was living in Springfield at the time, but nothing definitive tied him to the women's disappearance. Tips poured in from across the country, psychics claimed visions, strangers swore they had seen the women in other states, but each lead dissolved into nothing, like footprints in the rain. Over the years, theories multiplied, some whispered about human trafficking, others about a targeted killing by someone the women knew, a few even suggested the involvement of multiple perpetrators, but with no bodies, no crime scene, and no eyewitnesses, the case became a black hole of unanswered questions. The haunting element, beyond the sheer impossibility of three people vanishing at once, was the ordinariness of their final hours, graduation celebrations, shared laughter, the comfort of returning home, and how quickly that ordinariness turned into something unimaginable. Families kept their porches lit for years, hoping the women might walk back through the door. Birthdays were marked in absentia, and every anniversary brought renewed media pleas that never seemed to break through the noise of bigger, flashier true crime stories. Cheryl's warm professionalism, Susie's rebellious humor, and Stacy's bright optimism became fragments preserved only in photographs and memories, while the case, despite being one of Missouri's most infamous mysteries, received shockingly little national attention, overshadowed in the 1990s by high-profile cases like Polly Klaas and JonBenet Ramsey. As decades passed, the house on Delmar Street changed hands, neighbors moved away, and Springfield grew and changed, but somewhere, in the tangled web of human memory and hidden truths, the answer still exists, maybe buried deep in a field, locked away in a guilty mind, or lying in the shadows of an evidence box in some forgotten police archive. Today, the Springfield Three remain missing, their story a chilling reminder that not every crime comes with closure, not every victim gets a headline, and not every family receives the justice they deserve, and perhaps that is what makes their disappearance so haunting, because if three people can vanish from their own home, leaving behind everything but themselves, and the world can simply move on, then what does that say about how easily we, too, could be erased from the story? On the cold, rain-swept night of February 14, 2000, in the small town of Shelby, North Carolina, while most children were tucked safely in bed dreaming of candy hearts and classroom valentines, 9-year-old Asha Jakia Degree, bright-eyed, shy, fiercely independent, and adored by her close-knit family, rose from her bed in the room she shared with her older brother O'Brien, quietly dressed in the clothes she had worn to church the day before, and stepped into the darkness, leaving behind the warmth of her home and the safety of her parents' love, embarking on a journey no one would ever fully understand. Her parents, Harold and Aquila Degree, had worked hard to protect their children from the dangers of the world, raising them in a stable home without internet, limiting television, and keeping them involved in school and church. But sometime between 2:30 and 3:15 a.m., Asha slipped out into the heavy rain and wind, carrying a small backpack packed with personal belongings, her favorite clothes, a Tweety Bird purse, and a few treasured keepsakes, walking alone along Highway 18, where at least 2 motorists saw her, their accounts forever burned into the timeline of that night, a small figure, wearing a white shirt and white pants, trudging determinedly through the storm, her head down against the wind. When one driver turned around to check on her, she darted into the woods and vanished into the blackness. By morning, when her parents awoke and found her missing, panic set in. Asha had no history of running away, no reason to flee, no note left behind, and in the years since, the most agonizing question has remained not only where she went, but why. Search teams scoured the area, police dogs traced her scent to a nearby shed where candy wrappers were found, candy she had received at basketball practice the night before, but the trail went cold until 18 months later, when her backpack, double-wrapped in plastic trash bags, was discovered buried along the edge of Highway 18 in Burke County, 26 miles away, still containing some of her clothes and possessions, preserved as if deliberately hidden, the plastic shielding them from weather and time. This discovery reignited the investigation, shifting the tone from a missing child case to the possibility of abduction, and over the years, theories have ranged from Asha being lured by someone she trusted, to her meeting a stranger who gained her confidence, to the haunting possibility that she had arranged a secret meeting without understanding the danger. Her case never garnered the nationwide attention of other missing children, perhaps because there was no dramatic crime scene, no shocking footage, and no clear suspect. Yet for her family and the Shelby community, her absence has been a wound that will never fully close. Harold and Aquila have kept her memory alive with annual prayer walks retracing her last known steps, their faith unshaken despite the passing years, and the FBI has continued to investigate, releasing age progression photos to show what Asha might look like today, now a grown woman in her early 30s if she survived that night. But in the quiet moments between press conferences and renewed pleas for tips, the mystery remains as impenetrable as the darkness she walked into, and the chilling image of a little girl, alone on a rain-lashed highway in the dead of night, will forever haunt anyone who hears her story, a reminder that danger does not always come in the form of a breaking window or a scream in the night, but sometimes in the silence of unanswered questions, and in the absence of the truth the world never fought hard enough to find. Between 1986 and 1989, along a serene stretch of road winding through the historic beauty of Virginia's Colonial Parkway, a place where tourists came to soak in the views of the York River, where couples parked to watch the sunset, and where the whisper of the wind through the trees blended with the distant hum of history. Something dark and predatory was stalking in the shadows, turning this peaceful ribbon of asphalt into the hunting ground for one of America's most overlooked series of murders. Over the course of 3 years, at least 4 couples, 8 young lives, were murdered in a way that suggested calculation, control, and a disturbing intimacy with the victims' final moments, and yet, despite the brutality, the case never became the national obsession that other serial crimes of the era inspired. The first known victims, Kathy Thomas, a 27-year-old U.S. Naval Academy graduate, and her girlfriend Rebecca Dowski, a 21-year-old college student, were found in October 1986 inside Kathy's white Honda Civic, the vehicle pulled off the road, the bodies partially hidden, their throats slit, and the interior soaked in diesel fuel as if the killer had planned to burn the evidence but abandoned the idea. No signs of robbery, no signs of sexual assault, just a quiet and efficient execution. Less than a year later, in September 1987, David Knobling, 20, and Robin Edwards, 14, were discovered near the James River, their bodies left in the open, both shot, their truck abandoned. Nearby, in April 1988, Richard Call, 20, and Cassandra Haley, 18, disappeared after a college date, their car later found on the parkway with no trace of them ever recovered, no bodies, no conclusive evidence, only the hollow ache of a mystery with no sender. And in September 1989, Daniel Lauer, 21, and Anna Maria Phelps, 18, vanished while traveling between Virginia Beach and Amelia County, their bodies eventually discovered in the woods near a rest area, showing signs of stabbing and possible strangulation. The consistencies in the cases, the pairing of young couples, the isolated locations, the lack of theft, led investigators to suspect a single killer, possibly with law enforcement or military connections, someone who could approach people without alarming them, someone who knew the parkway's isolated pull-offs and how to vanish without leaving clear forensic evidence. Over the decades, numerous suspects have surfaced, from disgraced former officers to known violent offenders, yet the murders remain officially unsolved, the killer's identity still hidden in plain sight. For the families, the pain has been compounded by the lack of resolution, the way each anniversary passes with only silence from the person who destroyed their worlds. For the locals, the Colonial Parkway has become a place where beauty and menace coexist, where the rustle of leaves in the evening wind carries an undertone of fear, and where every empty pull-off is a reminder that someone, somewhere, once used these secluded spaces not for romance but for death. Overshadowed by the media frenzy surrounding serial killers like the Green River Killer and BTK, these murders never gained the attention or resources that could have changed the outcome, leaving them as ghost stories whispered by those who know the road too well. Today, even as modern DNA techniques and cold case units revisit the evidence, the killer, if alive, has had decades to bury their secrets, and the Colonial Parkway remains haunted not only by the memory of the victims, but by the chilling knowledge that a predator once walked its curves and may have simply stepped back into the crowd, unseen, unpunished, and perhaps still smiling in the knowledge that they got away with murder. On the night of December 6, 1991, in Austin, Texas, a city alive with the buzz of holiday shopping and the glow of Christmas lights strung across storefronts, 4 teenage girls were living out the small joys and rituals of youth, unaware that their lives were about to be swallowed by one of the most horrifying and mishandled crimes in Texas history, a case that would devastate families, shake public trust, and yet never receive the sustained national attention it deserved. Sisters Jennifer Harbison, 17, and Sarah Harbison, 15, along with Jennifer's best friend Eliza Thomas, 17, were working the closing shift at an I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, shop in a quiet strip mall, while 13-year-old Amy Ayres, Sarah's friend, had spent the evening at the mall before joining them near closing time, the kind of innocent gathering that should have ended with shared laughs and goodbyes. Yet sometime between 11 p.m. and midnight, horror unfolded behind the shop's glass doors, when firefighters responded to a blaze in the yogurt shop in the early hours of December 7th. They made a discovery so brutal that even seasoned investigators were shaken. The bodies of all 4 girls, bound, gagged, shot in the head, and in some cases showing signs of sexual assault, were found amid the smoldering ruins, their young lives extinguished in a manner so calculated and vicious it seemed the work of someone with both cruelty and control, someone who had taken time to subdue and murder them before setting the fire to destroy evidence. The killings stunned Austin, a city that in the early 90s still clung to a reputation as a safe, laid-back college town, and in the immediate aftermath, police pressure to solve the crime was immense, but that urgency led to investigative missteps that would haunt the case for decades. In 1999, 8 years after the murders, 4 young men, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn, were arrested after lengthy, high-pressure interrogations, with Springsteen and Scott eventually convicted, their alleged confessions serving as the backbone of the prosecution despite glaring inconsistencies in the absence of physical evidence linking them to the scene. Years later, DNA testing on evidence from the crime scene excluded all 4 men, revealing that the confessions, extracted after hours of coercive questioning, had been false, and the convictions were overturned, leaving the families of the victims in the crushing position of not only losing their daughters but also knowing that justice had been botched. The case remains officially unsolved, the unknown DNA belonging to a still unidentified male, and while theories have ranged from a robbery gone wrong to a targeted attack by someone known to the girls, the truth remains buried under decades of investigative failures and public apathy. For the families, every anniversary is a reminder not only of the violent way their daughters were taken but of the unanswered questions that linger, questions that the national media never championed the way they did with other high-profile tragedies of the 90s, leaving the yogurt shop murders to exist in that heartbreaking space between notorious and forgotten. Today, the strip mall is gone, replaced by a different business, the walls that once contained the girls' final moments now erased, but for those who remember, the smell of smoke and cold December air, the image of police lights cutting through the night, and the knowledge that the killer, or killers, walked away into the darkness will never fade, a permanent wound in Austin's history and a chilling testament to how even the most shocking crimes can slip into the shadows when the cameras move on. On February 2, 2009, in the dusty outskirts of Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the desert stretches in endless shades of ochre and the horizon blurs into the sky, a woman walking her dog stumbled upon something that would unravel one of the most disturbing and overlooked mass murder cases in modern American history. What she initially thought was a bone protruding from the sand turned out to be human, and as investigators began to dig, the earth yielded a grim and expanding secret: the remains of 11 women, along with one unborn child, buried in shallow graves across a half-mile stretch of remote mesa, each skeleton telling a story of a life lived on the margins and ended violently, all pointing to a single, still unknown killer the press would come to call the West Mesa Bone Collector. The victims, aged between 15 and 32, were mostly Hispanic women, many involved in sex work or struggling with addiction, lives that society often overlooks, and perhaps that invisibility is exactly what allowed the killer to hunt them without drawing attention. Among them was Michelle Valdez, who was 4 months pregnant, her unborn baby's tiny remains found alongside hers, and others like Jamie Barella, just 15 years old, whose innocence was devoured by the same predator. The timeline suggested that the murders took place between 2001 and 2005, years before the graves were discovered, meaning the killer had moved on long before anyone even realized the scope of the crime. in the desert, had been keeping its secrets until that fateful day. Police investigated a range of suspects, from local pimps to known violent offenders, and even a former resident named Lorenzo Montoya, a man with a history of violence against sex workers who was killed by a client's boyfriend in 2006, after being caught in the act of strangling a woman. But no definitive evidence has tied anyone to the West Mesa graves. The case has been plagued by the painful reality that many of the victims' disappearances were never seriously investigated at the time they went missing, a reflection of systemic bias that devalues the lives of women living on the edge of society, and perhaps that is why, despite the sheer scale of the crime, the story faded quickly from national headlines, overshadowed by more sensational cases involving victims from safer, more affluent worlds. For the families, the grief is layered, not only mourning the loss but also the years of silence before their loved ones were even found. The knowledge that they had been calling for help into a void, and the bitter truth that if these women had fit a different societal mold, perhaps the killer would have been caught. Today, the West Mesa remains both a memorial and a wound, a place where memorial crosses are planted in the sand, where the wind whistles through the emptiness as if carrying the voices of the dead, and where the unanswered question hangs heavier than the desert heat: who buried these women here, and how many more are out there, waiting for someone to care enough to dig? In the early to mid-1980s, a chilling pattern began to emerge along the highways and backroads of the American South and Midwest: bodies of young women, most with reddish hair or auburn tones, turning up in ditches, woods, and fields, often nude or partially clothed, their lives snuffed out by an elusive predator who seemed to be hunting those living on society's fringes. The first known case, 16-year-old Tina Farmer, was found in December 1984 near Jellicoe, Tennessee, her body wrapped in a blanket and discarded like trash along Interstate 75, but she was only the beginning, and soon, other victims appeared across Kentucky, Arkansas, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, their only obvious connection being their hair color and the transient nature of their lives. Some were sex workers, some hitchhikers, some simply women trying to start over, all of them vulnerable. Many had no identification, and some remained Jane Does for decades, their identities hidden as much as their killer's face. The media dubbed the killings the Redhead Murders, a name that at once sensationalized and trivialized the horror, while law enforcement struggled to link the cases across multiple jurisdictions, handicapped by the lack of modern forensic technology and the sheer geography of the crimes. In 1985, a truck driver named Jerry Leon Johns was arrested for the attempted murder of a red-haired woman in Tennessee, and while he was linked to one of the murders through DNA years later, it became clear he could not account for all the victims, suggesting either multiple killers or a single predator whose trail stretched across hundreds of miles. The trucker theory gained traction: someone with reason to travel state to state, able to pick up women at truck stops or rest areas, kill them in transit, and dump their bodies where they might never be found. But even this has never been definitively proven. For the families, the tragedy was twofold: not only had their loved ones been brutally murdered, but many of them had to fight for decades just to have them identified, their memories hanging in limbo between hope and despair. One by one, through advances in DNA and genealogy, some of the victims' names have been restored: Lisa Nichols in Arkansas, Jean Gilbert in Indiana, Tina Farmer in Tennessee, but the killer, or killers, remain nameless, their shadows still stretching over the lonely highways where the wind hums through the grass, carrying whispers of women with fiery hair who vanished without a trace, bound together in death by a color that caught the light and, perhaps, caught the wrong kind of attention. On a cold December night in 2010, a Suffolk County police officer and his K-9 were searching the desolate stretch of Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach for a missing woman named Shannon Gilbert when the dog caught a scent and led his handler to a burlap sack. Inside was the decomposed body of 24-year-old Melissa Barthélemy, and within days, 3 more young women were found nearby, all wrapped in burlap, all sex workers who had advertised their services online. This grim discovery unraveled one of the most haunting serial murder investigations in modern American history, revealing that the Gilgo Beach marshland was not just a dumping ground for one killer, but perhaps for several, with over a dozen sets of human remains eventually discovered along the same stretch, some dating back years. The press quickly dubbed the predator the Long Island serial killer or LISK, and the case drew nationwide attention, not only for its brutality, but for the chilling sense of organization. The killer seemed careful, methodical, able to vanish into the shadows of suburban Long Island despite police and FBI scrutiny. The victims, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Amber Lynn Costello, Megan Waterman, and others, were all someone's daughter, sister, or friend, but their work in the sex trade left them especially vulnerable, targeted by someone who knew how to exploit both their trust and society's indifference. Over the years, speculation has swirled around potential suspects: a disgraced police chief, a former doctor, local businessmen, but the investigation stalled repeatedly, clouded by jurisdictional conflicts, botched evidence handling, and the ever-present question of whether there might be more than one killer operating in the area. In July 2023, after more than a decade of dead ends, authorities arrested architect Rex Hoyerman, charging him with several of the murders. Yet even this long-awaited breakthrough left more questions than answers, as many of the unidentified remains did not match the suspected killer's known victims, suggesting the marsh may have been a dumping ground for multiple predators over time. For the families of the dead, the arrests bring a sliver of hope, but until every victim is named, and every killer brought to justice, the winds off the Atlantic will continue to whisper their unfinished story along that lonely stretch of sand and sea grass, where the tide erases footprints, and the night hides the darkest secrets. When the final page of these cases closes in our minds, we are left not with neat resolutions or comforting justice, but with the aching silence of questions that will never be answered, and the faces of those whose lives were stolen lingering like shadows in our thoughts. The Springfield 3, Asha Degree, the lovers of Colonial Parkway, the girls in the yogurt shop, the bones beneath the West Mesa sands, the nameless red-haired victims, and the women left to the cold winds of Gilgo Beach, all of them cry out across time for truth, for remembrance, for dignity that can never be stolen by the cruelty of those who took their lives. And as we turn away from their stories tonight, let us not let them fade into the static of forgotten news or the dust of closed files, but carry their names, their dreams, their humanity within us, because the dead cannot speak, but they can still be heard through those who refuse to forget. For in the end, justice is not only found in courtrooms or in handcuffs, it is found in the stubborn beating of hearts that will not rest until the lost are found, the guilty are unmasked, and the innocent are given the peace they were denied. And perhaps, in remembering, we make a small promise, not only to them, but to ourselves, that no matter how dark the night or how deep the silence, we will keep looking, keep asking, keep telling their stories, until every last secret is brought into the light.